Told you to move. Maybe now you'll listen.
I'm blind, not invisible.
I warned you. This is your fault.
Police tased a blind veteran crossing the street. 7 minutes later, a military convoy blocked the road. When officers Miller and Davis tased 78-year-old blind veteran Samuel Bell for obstructing traffic while crossing with his guide dog, they thought they were dealing with just another difficult civilian. 7 minutes later, General Michael Vance's military convoy surrounded the intersection, proving that some bonds of brotherhood transcend rank, time, and circumstance. The morning sun cast long shadows across the busy intersection of 5th and Main in downtown Phoenix, where rush-hour traffic moved in its predictable rhythm of stops and starts. The crosswalk signal chirped its electronic melody, designed to help visually impaired pedestrians navigate the urban maze safely. It was a sound that most people ignored, but for Sam Bell, it was a lifeline in a world of perpetual darkness. At 78, Sam moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned to navigate by sound touch and the unwavering loyalty of his guide dog. Guide, a 4-year-old German Shepherd, whose intelligence and training made him more than a pet, more than a companion, but a true partner in independence. Sam's white cane swept methodically across the pavement, its familiar rhythm a percussion section in the symphony of city sounds that had become his reality since losing his sight to an IED explosion in Vietnam 53 years earlier. Sam's weathered face bore the lines of someone who had seen too much before darkness claimed his vision forever. His military bearing remained evident despite his age, shoulders squared, head held high, moving with the purposeful stride of a man who had once led soldiers through jungle warfare and had never learned to surrender to adversity. The Bronze Star and Purple Heart ribbons on his veteran's cap told a story of service and sacrifice that few people bothered to read anymore. Guide wore his working harness clearly marked with patches identifying him as a service animal, his golden eyes alert and focused on his sacred duty of keeping Sam safe. The dog had been trained at a cost of $50,000 by a nonprofit organization dedicated to serving wounded veterans, and his presence represented not just independence for Sam, but dignity and hope in a world that often seemed designed to exclude people with disabilities. The intersection where Sam crossed twice daily on his way to the VA clinic had become as familiar as his own living room. He knew the timing of the lights, the sound patterns of the traffic, the texture of the pavement that told him when he was veering off course. This routine walk was one of the few remaining connections to the independence he had fought so hard to maintain after returning from a war that had cost him his sight, but not his spirit. What Sam didn't know was that officers Miller and Davis, both in their mid-20s with less than 2 years of combined experience, were having the worst day of their short careers and were about to make it infinitely worse by targeting the wrong person at the wrong time in a city where military brotherhood ran deeper than civilian authority. Sam's morning routine had been the same for 3 years, ever since he'd moved to Phoenix to be closer to the VA medical center that provided his ongoing care. The walk from his small apartment to the clinic was exactly 1.2 miles, a journey that took him 45 minutes with Guide's assistance and his own careful navigation. It was a route he had memorized with military precision, counting steps, noting landmarks by sound and smell, creating a mental map that allowed him to maintain the independence that meant everything to him. The decision to make this walk daily, despite offers of transportation from well-meaning neighbors and VA shuttle services, was rooted in Sam's fundamental belief that surrender was not an option. He had lost his sight serving his country, but he refused to lose his autonomy to fear or convenience. Each successful journey was a small victory against the limitations that others tried to impose on him, proof that a blind veteran could still navigate the world with dignity and purpose. Sam's strategy for crossing busy intersections had been developed through years of practice and occasional mistakes that had taught him valuable lessons about timing, patience, and trust in Guide's training. He would position himself at the corner, listen for the traffic patterns, wait for the audible signal, and then move with confidence while Guide assessed the safety of each step. It was a partnership built on mutual trust and thousands of hours of practice. The first sign of trouble came when officers Miller and Davis, responding to a minor fender bender 3 blocks away, found themselves stuck in traffic at the intersection where Sam was preparing to cross. Miller, the senior officer, despite being only 26, was already frustrated by their delayed response time and the paperwork that awaited them. Davis, fresh out of the academy and eager to prove himself, was looking for any excuse to assert the authority that his badge represented. "Look at this guy," Miller said, gesturing toward Sam as the elderly veteran waited for the crossing signal. "He's going to hold up traffic for 5 minutes with that dog." The comment revealed both his ignorance about guide dog training and his fundamental misunderstanding of disability rights, but Davis nodded in agreement, already calculating how they might speed up the process. When the crossing signal activated and Sam began his careful journey across the street, Guide leading with the practiced precision of a trained professional. The two officers saw not a disabled veteran exercising his legal right to safe passage, but an obstacle to their urgent police business. Miller rolled down his window and shouted, "Hey, move it along, you're holding up traffic." The command was both illegal and cruel, but it was delivered with the casual authority of someone who had never been challenged. Sam focused on his crossing and trusting Guide to navigate around any obstacles. Either didn't hear the command over the traffic noise, or chose to ignore what he recognized as an inappropriate demand. He continued at his normal pace, which was careful but not unreasonably slow, while Guide performed his trained duty of ensuring their safe passage across the busy intersection. The escalation began when Miller, interpreting Sam's continued progress as defiance rather than necessity, activated his patrol car's lights and siren. The sudden noise and flashing lights confused Guide momentarily, causing the dog to pause and reassess the situation, a trained response to unexpected stimuli that was designed to prevent accidents, but which Miller interpreted as deliberate obstruction. "That's it," Miller said, throwing the patrol car into park and stepping out into traffic. "This old man thinks he can ignore police commands. Time to teach him some respect." Davis followed his hand, already moving toward the equipment on his belt. Both officers about to make a decision that would haunt them for the rest of their careers and spark a confrontation that would expose the ugly reality of how some law enforcement officers treat the most vulnerable members of society. The confrontation escalated with frightening speed as Miller approached Sam, who was now 3/4 of the way across the intersection, still moving at his careful but steady pace, with Guide maintaining perfect position beside him. The veteran had no idea that two police officers were approaching from behind their footsteps, lost in the ambient noise of traffic and construction that filled the downtown Phoenix air. "Sir, stop right there," Miller shouted, his voice carrying the aggressive tone of someone who expected immediate compliance. Sam, startled by the sudden command from directly behind him, paused momentarily, causing Guide to stop and look back toward the source of the disturbance. The trained dog's protective instincts were beginning to activate as he sensed potential danger to his handler. Sam turned his head in the direction of the voice, his sightless eyes searching for understanding in a situation that made no sense to him. "Officer," he said, his voice carrying the respectful tone of someone who had been taught to cooperate with law enforcement. "Is there a problem? I'm crossing legally with my guide dog." He held up his white cane, the universal symbol of blindness, hoping to clarify any misunderstanding. Miller's response revealed both his ignorance and his arrogance. "You're obstructing traffic and ignoring police commands?" he said, stepping closer to Sam in a way that made Guide tense with protective concern. "I told you to move faster, and you ignored me. That's failure to comply with a lawful order." The accusation was both legally baseless and morally reprehensible, but Miller delivered it with the confidence of someone who had never been held accountable for his actions. Davis, eager to support his partner and demonstrate his own authority, circled around to Sam's front, effectively trapping the blind veteran between two aggressive officers in the middle of a busy intersection. "Sir, you need to control your animal and move to the sidewalk immediately," he commanded, apparently unaware that guide dogs are specifically trained not to be controlled in the traditional sense, but to make independent decisions about their handler's safety. The situation became critical when Sam, confused and increasingly frightened by the aggressive behavior of the officers, tried to explain his situation more clearly. "Officers, I'm a disabled veteran. This is my guide dog, Guide. We're crossing legally and I can't move any faster than this safely. Please let us finish crossing so we can get out of traffic." His words were calm and reasonable, but they seemed to enrage Miller further. "I don't care if you're the president," Miller snarled, his hand moving to his taser. "When a police officer gives you an order, you follow it immediately. Your disability doesn't give you the right to ignore lawful commands." The statement revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of both disability rights and police authority, but it was delivered with the absolute certainty of someone who believed his badge gave him unlimited power. The crowd of witnesses that had gathered on both sides of the intersection began to murmur with growing concern and anger. Several people pulled out their phones to record what was clearly becoming an unjust confrontation. Among the witnesses was retired Colonel James Harrison, who had been walking to his morning coffee when he noticed the commotion. Harrison immediately recognized both the military bearing of the elderly man and the illegal nature of the police harassment. Guide, trained to protect his handler from all threats, began to position himself between Sam and the aggressive officers. The dog's body language shifted from alert assistance to protective warning, his training telling him that his handler was in danger. This protective behavior, which was exactly what Guide had been trained to do, was misinterpreted by Davis as aggression. "The dog is becoming aggressive," Davis shouted, his voice carrying across the intersection. "He's threatening officers." The lie was immediately contradicted by anyone who understood dog behavior, but it provided the excuse that both officers seemed to be looking for to escalate their use of force. Sam, sensing the growing tension and fearing for Guide's safety more than his own, tried to de-escalate the situation. "Please, officers, Guide is just doing his job. He's trained to protect me, but he won't hurt anyone unless I'm actually attacked. Can we please just move to the sidewalk and discuss this calmly?" His plea for reasonableness fell on deaf ears as Miller made the decision that would define the rest of his career. "That's it," Miller said, drawing his taser. "You're under arrest for failure to comply and having a dangerous animal in public. Get on the ground now." The command was physically impossible for a 78-year-old blind man to safely execute in the middle of a busy intersection. But Miller was beyond caring about logic or legality. Colonel Harrison, recognizing that he was about to witness a grave injustice, pulled out his phone and made a call that would change everything. "This is Colonel Harrison," he said to the duty officer at Luke Air Force Base. "I need you to contact General Vance immediately. We have a situation downtown involving police brutality against a blind veteran. Tell him it's urgent and that military intervention may be necessary." The tasing happened without warning, 50,000 volts coursing through the body of a 78-year-old blind veteran whose only crime had been crossing the street at a legal pace with his guide dog. Sam's body convulsed and collapsed onto the hot asphalt of the intersection, his white cane clattering away as his muscles seized uncontrollably. Guide immediately moved to his handler's side, whimpering with distress, as he tried to understand why his beloved partner was suddenly in agony. The crowd's reaction was immediate and visceral. Shouts of outrage erupted from both sidewalks as witnesses realized they had just watched police officers attack a disabled elderly man for no apparent reason. "He's blind!" someone screamed. "What the hell is wrong with you?" another voice added. Cell phones appeared throughout the crowd, recording every moment of the aftermath as Sam lay motionless on the pavement, Guide standing protectively over his fallen handler. Miller, apparently realizing that the situation had spiraled beyond his control, began shouting commands that made no sense in the context of what had just occurred. "Stop resisting," he yelled at the unconscious veteran. "Control your animal," he added, pointing at Guide, who was doing nothing more than providing comfort to his injured handler. The absurdity of the commands only served to further enrage the growing crowd of witnesses. Davis, younger and less experienced than his partner, seemed to suddenly understand the magnitude of what they had done. His face went pale as he looked at the elderly man lying motionless on the asphalt, surrounded by the scattered contents of his pockets and the white cane that had identified him as blind. "Miller," he said quietly, "I think we made a mistake. This guy's really blind. Look at his cane. Look at his dog's vest." But Miller was too deep into his power trip to acknowledge any error. "Mistake's nothing," he snapped. "He was resisting arrest and his dog was threatening officers. We followed proper procedure." The statement was so divorced from reality that even Davis looked skeptical, but the senior officer's confidence seemed unshakable, even in the face of obvious wrongdoing. The crisis deepened when Sam began showing signs of cardiac distress. The combination of the electrical shock, his age, and the stress of the situation had triggered what appeared to be a heart attack. Guide, trained to recognize medical emergencies, began performing the alert behaviors he had been taught, but the officers interpreted his actions as continued aggression. "The dog is still acting up," Miller said, his hand moving toward his service weapon. "I'm going to have to put it down if it doesn't back off." The threat to shoot a guide dog protecting his injured handler sent the crowd into a frenzy of outrage. Several people began moving toward the intersection, their anger overriding their concern for their own safety. Colonel Harrison's phone call had reached its target. At Luke Air Force Base, 20 miles away, General Michael Vance was in the middle of a staff meeting when his aide burst in with an urgent message. "Sir, we have a situation downtown. A blind veteran is being attacked by police. Colonel Harrison is requesting immediate military intervention." Vance, a 30-year veteran who had commanded troops in 3 different wars, didn't hesitate. "Get me a convoy," he ordered. "Full escort lights and sirens. And get me the mayor's office on the phone. If local law enforcement is attacking our veterans, they're going to answer to me personally." Within 3 minutes, a convoy of 6 military vehicles was racing toward downtown Phoenix, led by the general's command vehicle. The turning point came when paramedics arrived on scene and immediately began treating Sam for what appeared to be a heart attack. Their professional assessment contradicted everything the officers had claimed about the situation. "This man needs immediate medical attention," the lead paramedic announced, who authorized the use of a taser on a 78-year-old cardiac patient. Miller's response revealed the depth of his delusion. He was resisting arrest and his dog was threatening officers. He repeated as if saying it enough times would make it true. But the paramedic, a veteran himself, wasn't buying the explanation. "This man is blind," he said flatly. "His dog is a trained guide animal. There's no way either of them posed a threat to anyone." As sirens wailed in the distance, not police sirens, but the distinctive sound of military vehicles approaching at high speed, Miller and Davis began to realize that their actions had consequences they hadn't anticipated. The crowd was growing larger and angrier. The media was arriving, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of approaching authority suggested that their version of events was about to be challenged by people with real power and genuine concern for justice. The sound of military vehicles approaching at high speed cut through the chaos of the intersection like a blade. Their sirens, different from civilian emergency vehicles, deeper, more authoritative, carrying the weight of federal authority. General Michael Vance's convoy appeared at the far end of Main Street, 6 vehicles moving in perfect formation with the precision that only military drivers could achieve under emergency conditions. The crowd that had gathered to witness the aftermath of Sam's tasing began to part as the convoy approached, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Colonel Harrison, still on his phone coordinating with military personnel, felt a surge of relief as he recognized the lead vehicle. General Vance had a reputation throughout the Southwest military community as a leader who never abandoned his people, active duty or veteran. Miller and Davis, still standing over Sam's prone form, while paramedics worked frantically to stabilize his condition, looked up in confusion as the military convoy surrounded the intersection. "What the hell is this?" Miller muttered, his earlier confidence beginning to crack as he realized that the situation was escalating far beyond his ability to control. General Vance emerged from the lead vehicle before it had fully stopped his presence, immediately commanding the attention of everyone in the area. At 52, he carried himself with the bearing of someone who had earned his stars through combat leadership rather than political maneuvering. His uniform was immaculate, his expression grim, and his eyes focused with laser intensity on the scene before him. "Secure the perimeter," Vance ordered his security detail. "No one leaves this intersection until I understand exactly what happened here." Military police began establishing a controlled area around the scene, their professional demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos that had preceded their arrival. The general's authority was absolute and unquestioned, transforming the intersection from a crime scene into a military operation. Vance's first priority was Sam's condition. He knelt beside the paramedics, his voice carrying the concern of someone who understood the sacred obligation to care for wounded warriors. "How is he?" he asked the lead paramedic. "What's his condition?" The medical team's report was grim: possible heart attack, electrical burns from the taser, and severe trauma from the fall. Sam was unconscious but breathing guide, maintaining his vigil beside the stretcher. The general's attention then turned to the 2 police officers who found themselves facing a level of authority they had never encountered. "Officers," Vance said, his voice carrying the quiet menace of someone accustomed to command in life or death situations. "I'm General Michael Vance, United States Air Force. I want a complete explanation of why you attacked a blind veteran who was legally crossing the street with his service animal." Miller, still clinging to his version of events, began his rehearsed explanation. "Sir, the subject was obstructing traffic and failed to comply with lawful orders. When his animal became aggressive, we were forced to use appropriate force to maintain public safety." The words sounded hollow and rehearsed, especially in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Vance's response was swift and devastating. "Officer, I've been briefed by multiple witnesses, including a retired colonel, who observed the entire incident. Your version of events doesn't match the facts. This man is a decorated Vietnam veteran who lost his sight serving his country. His guide dog is a trained service animal. You had no legal authority to detain him, no justification for using force, and no excuse for your actions. The climax of the confrontation came when Davis, the younger officer, finally broke under the pressure. "General, sir," he said, his voice shaking, "I think we made a mistake. The man was just trying to cross the street. We thought he was ignoring us on purpose." His admission of error, while honest, only served to highlight the complete lack of justification for their actions. Colonel Harrison approached the general with his phone, which had been recording the entire incident from the moment the tasing occurred. "Sir," he said, "I have video evidence of the entire encounter. These officers attacked a blind veteran without provocation, then threatened to shoot his guide dog when the animal tried to protect his handler. The video evidence would later become crucial in the legal proceedings that followed." The emotional peak of the confrontation came when Sam briefly regained consciousness as he was being loaded into the ambulance. His first words weren't about his own condition or the injustice he had suffered. They were about Guide. "Is my dog okay?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Please don't let them hurt Guide." The concern of a wounded veteran for his service animal, even while suffering from a heart attack, brought tears to the eyes of hardened military personnel. General Vance personally assured Sam that Guide would be protected and cared for. "Sergeant Bell," he said, using Sam's military rank as a sign of respect, "your dog is safe. My people will take care of him until you're back on your feet. You have my word as an officer and a fellow soldier." The promise carried the weight of military honor, and Sam's relief was visible even through his pain. The final confrontation between military and civilian authority came when the police department's shift supervisor arrived on scene, clearly expecting to take control of the situation from the military personnel. "General," the supervisor said, "this is a civilian law enforcement matter. We appreciate your concern, but we'll handle the investigation from here." Vance's response left no room for misunderstanding. "Supervisor, this ceased being a local matter the moment your officers attacked a federal veteran exercising his civil rights. This intersection is now under federal jurisdiction pending a complete investigation. Your officers will remain here until federal agents arrive to take their statements." The authority of federal law enforcement backed by military presence was absolute and unchallengeable. As Sam was transported to the hospital with Guide riding alongside in a military vehicle, the intersection remained under military control. The message was clear: attacks on veterans would not be tolerated, and the military would use every resource at its disposal to ensure justice for those who had served their country with honor. The federal investigation that followed Sam's tasing was swift and comprehensive, led by the FBI's Civil Rights Division with full cooperation from military authorities. The video evidence, witness statements, and medical records painted a clear picture of police brutality against a disabled veteran, resulting in federal charges against both officers under the Civil Rights Act. Miller received a 5-year federal prison sentence, while Davis, whose cooperation and obvious remorse were considered mitigating factors, received 2 years in mandatory community service with veteran organizations. The Phoenix Police Department faced a complete overhaul of their training programs, mandated by federal court order and overseen by military advisors who understood the unique needs and rights of veteran populations. The new protocols included mandatory training on disability rights service animal laws and de-escalation techniques specifically designed for interactions with elderly and disabled citizens. The department also established a veteran liaison program staffed by former military personnel who could bridge the gap between civilian law enforcement and the veteran community. Sam's recovery was long but complete, aided by the outpouring of support from the military community and the general public. The GoFundMe campaign established by Colonel Harrison raised over $500,000 for Sam's medical expenses and ongoing care, while the VA provided enhanced services, including a new guide dog to work alongside Guide. The 2 dogs trained to work as a team gave Sam unprecedented independence and mobility. General Vance's intervention became a case study in military leadership and the obligation to protect veterans taught at military academies and leadership schools across the country. His decisive action demonstrated that military brotherhood extends beyond active duty, encompassing all who have served with honor. The general received commendations from veteran organizations nationwide and was promoted to head the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection. The intersection where Sam was attacked became the site of an annual memorial walk organized by veteran groups to raise awareness about disability rights and police accountability. A permanent memorial plaque installed by the city as part of their settlement with Sam reads, "In honor of all disabled veterans who continue to serve their communities with courage and dignity." Guide, now retired but still Sam's companion, became a therapy dog for other wounded veterans. His story inspiring a new generation of service animals and their handlers to never give up hope in the face of adversity.